My name's Mark Florence. I'm the Director of Community and Economic Development at Indigo Shire, and I'm also the recently appointed Chair of the Age-Friendly Northeast Victoria Alliance. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're all gathering in your particular location, and pay respect to elders past, present and emerging. I'd just like to recognise a couple of our attendees. First and foremost, I'd like to acknowledge the Honourable Helen Haines, who's the MP Federal Member for Indi, and really appreciate you joining us today, Helen, and you'll have more to say later. Also like to recognise Heather Betts, who is the Chair from Benalla Health, but she's the Chair of the Central Hume Primary Care Partnership, and that organisation has played a major role in the compilation of the report that we're about to launch today, and also plays a role in supporting Kathleen Brasher in her role as project manager with the Age-Friendly Northeast Victoria Alliance. So they're the also recognising Hugh Brackenshaw, who's the Executive Director. I've also played a large role in the work that's been done. Particular mention also to Dr Kathleen Brasher, who, as I mentioned, she's the project manager of the Age-Friendly Northeast Victoria Alliance, who's done an enormous amount of work, not only on this project, but on a whole range of other projects. And it's fair to say over the last 18 months, 2 years, Kathleen's been a catalyst in driving a lot of the initiatives across the age-friendly domain. And certainly in our case in Indigo has been a great support of the work that we're doing under our Ageing Well strategy, and sort of drove us to achieve the first Northeast Region Council membership of the Global Network for Age-Friendly Communities, which has been well received in our council and across the region as well. So thank you, Kathleen. So just a very brief introduction of the Age-Friendly Northeast Victoria Alliance. So it is a collaboration, I suppose, of a large number of agencies across the region, local governments being one of those. So there are 2 represented at the moment, Indigo and Wangaratta, and we're hoping to expand that, of course, but received tremendous support from Northeast Health, the Department of Health and Human Services, some of our educational institutions, La Trobe, Charles Sturt, PCPs, and a whole range of others across the organisation. And it's been a really strong representation that has, I suppose, worked to coordinate and link up the various activities and projects that each of us are doing, and each of us are doing quite well. And there's a broad range of activities, from programs on the ground to higher level advocacy and relationship building across various departments and organisations, and hopefully working through to decision makers as well. So Helen, this is an unashamed pitch to you to stay connected with the Alliance, because like all organisations and groups that come together, we do need support for us to continue. So I suppose I'm saying we be prepared to receive some information from us, and seeking your support in gaining some extra resources for the Alliance in the future. I think that's probably where we'll pause, and I'd like to now focus specifically on the report that's being launched today, and acknowledge the intent of that report, and the focus on how older people, when the community is confronted with disasters, and unfortunately over recent times we've been confronted with many, virus included, but more recently the fires, how older people bring a significant number of strengths through their experience, their wisdom, their connections with community, their understanding of how communities work, their relationships with individuals and groups, and the ability of older people to contribute to the recovery and the resilience of their individual communities or communities as a collective. Obviously, older people that are exposed to some vulnerabilities when it comes to disasters. They can be exposed because of health issues that may not be able to be met. They may not be able to access medication. They may need some more psychological support. They may lose connections with family. They may lose connections with community. So I think this report is quite timely in the current circumstances to maintain a focus on how we as organisations and we as community can build on the strengths that older people bring, but also to recognise the vulnerabilities that they may be exposed to. So that's the main purpose. Now, would like Helen Haines to have a few words and then to officially launch the report, if that's okay with you, Helen.
Thank you so much, Mark, and thank you to all of you for this really, really great invitation. I was so honoured to be invited to launch this report. So thank you, Mark. I acknowledge you as chair of the Age Friendly Communities. So I'd like to acknowledge Hugh Brokenshaw, Executive Officer of the Central Hume PCP, the great auspicing work for this. All the members of Age Friendly Northeast Victoria, and especially like to acknowledge Dr Kathleen Brasher, who's the Principal Strategic Advisor to the Age Friendly Communities and, of course, the author of this report. Mark just said those important words. This report is timely. It couldn't be more timely. I imagine that when you commenced this work, you had no idea what was going to come after what was, for many of us, the most dramatic and terribly difficult bushfire season. So it's timely and it's important. And just yesterday, actually, an organisation called the Commission for Human Futures launched their first report, and it's an organisation that's come out of the Australian National University and is chaired by Professor John Hewson, who I'm sure is well known to many of you. And Dr Hewson said yesterday that the whole COVID crisis is actually brought us together in a way that helps us to address so many challenges. And he argued, as did the participants in the in his group, that so many crises are in fact interconnected, and he highlighted 10 risks to human future, which bring into sharp focus many aspects of our society that we need to focus on. And I'm not going to list all 10 because it could be a little bit depressing. But amongst those 10, of course, the human challenges of climate change and the human challenges of food insecurity, of overpopulation, and of pandemics amongst the 10. And we've just come through the most extraordinary summer here in Australia, where we've experienced high temperatures that we have not seen in our recorded history. And of course, bushfires that raged across 5 states and indeed impacted on our own regional community here, particularly in the Upper Murray and in the Alpine regions. And I acknowledge I can see Dom Sandilands there, who was right in the thick of it in Corryong. And when we think about disasters, we often focus on the negative, not on the positive. And when we think about older people, of course, so much media attention is addressing the vulnerabilities of older people and often ignoring the many strengths and opportunities that are in front of us when we think about older people and their response to disaster. In Dr Hewson's address yesterday, he challenged us to look at disasters, and in the case he used yesterday, of course, was the COVID disaster, to use this as an opportunity to rethink society. And when I read this truly excellent report. That's exactly what was in my mind, that what this report brought to me was an opportunity to rethink our society. And of course, the age-friendly community movement is about that too, more broadly. But I see in front of us now, post-bushfires and in the midst of the COVID crisis, and here in Australia, of course, we are doing well from a health perspective with COVID, and we're talking about the emergence from it. And what might that look like? And can we build a society that is focusing less on the economic aspects of society and more on people and more on connection? And when I think about disasters, and when I think about the bushfire disaster that we've come through and the COVID crisis that we're in now, I ask the question, who's out in front? And these disasters have given us an opportunity to see different people out in front. And for me, the bit that struck me is that for the first time in a long time in political debate and in sociological discussion in Australia, we're seeing experts out in front. We've come through a period where we've seen the death of expertise in so many ways. We've seen the spread of misinformation and the rise of the armchair expert. But throughout the bushfires, we saw experts out in front. We saw fire commissioners. We saw volunteers with great expertise. And in this COVID crisis, what we've seen too is expertise. We've seen a national cabinet. We've seen the Australian Health Protection Principal Committee, which is led by the chief medical officers across all states. And we've seen the voice of expertise lead us. And to me, that's been so encouraging and invigorating. So I think what I love about this report is it's about expertise too. It's thoroughly and utterly evidence-based, and it's written by an expert. And we're so lucky in our region to have an expert such as Kathleen in our midst. This report is steeped in society. It's person-centric, it's place-based, and it's values-driven. And it absolutely suggests who should be at the table and who should be out in front. And I think that's so important, and it pushes to, again, a strengths-based approach and the strengths of older people in disasters. And the thing I loved about this report too is it of course, drew on the literature from all around the world, and we see a universality in what the strengths of older people are in disasters. And I've seen that with my own eyes in this most recent bushfire crisis. When I think of the volunteers that I met across the Upper Murray and the Alpine areas and in all the relief centres that I visited, I saw older people as Red Cross representatives, as chaplains. I saw them in the recovery, an early recovery period in Blaze Aid. I saw them cooking and delivering meals, and I saw them giving such wisdom. The report highlights this, of course. It also highlights the contribution that older people make in restoring the economy in the recovery phase, and it drew on that really important and under-discussed issue. It's almost old-fashioned, the moral strength and wisdom of older people. And that made me think of a very personal experience from many years ago in a major flood here in Wangaratta, 1993. And our neighbour was an elderly man. He was 85, and he was affectionately known by our very small children as Old Joe. And we were evacuated from our house in a small boat and delivered to the levee bank in Wangaratta. And standing on the levee bank was Old Joe, whose farm was on the right side of the levee bank. And Joe looked at us and said, "Oh, you all look terribly worried." We said, "Oh, Joe, we are. We think everything's going to be ruined." And he smiled and said, "Don't worry, you can rebuild it." And we all kind of got this great sense of relief from Joe that here he was at 85, and he was quite confident that it was okay, you didn't need to worry, you can just rebuild. And when I read this in this report about moral strength and wisdom, it took me straight to that personal experience of Old Joe. Of course, we need to touch on the vulnerabilities of older people, and many of those are well known. However, I did just want to draw your attention and many of you have probably read this as well, but the Medical Journal of Australia very recently just published an article about the broader impact of bushfire on our health, and on some modelling that they've undertaken, the authors have undertaken, outside of the 33 tragic deaths that were experienced in the bushfire, another 400 deaths across the nation could be attributed to the impacts of bushfire, most specifically around smoke, and highlighting that most of those deaths were in an older population, in older people who had pre-existing cardiovascular disease. And we know that the impact of smoke on people with poor lung health or cardiovascular disease increases the clotting in their blood and increases the propensity for heart attacks and strokes. So when we think about the vulnerabilities of older people, we need to think about that immediate post-recovery period and the impact of things like smoke and temperature, and I'm sure you're all well aware of that. This report is about recovery, and it highlights so beautifully community resilience, and it highlights the importance of that being led by older people. It talks about the social and economic resources that older people will bring and what we need to think about in recovery. And when I think about this too, most recently I had a large virtual meeting with the coordinator of the National Bushfire Recovery Agency, Mr. Andrew Colvin, and actually Dominic was part of that meeting. We had 72 people on Zoom over a couple of days, and one of the key discussion points was around the importance of financial counsellors and mental health workers being able to go door to door, to have face-to-face meetings in people's homes, particularly for older people, when it's so important to have trusting relationships and to feel able to report to someone else that you are feeling vulnerable or that you do need help in filling out a grant form for financial assistance. I was really interested around the risk communication and information channels that this report highlighted, and I was really pleased to see that this report touched on the fact that older people do use social media. So often we say they don't, but of course some of them do, and those that don't are often influenced by their friends and family who do use social media. So I think that was a really important thing for me to hear. But also to know that we must think about multiple channels in how we communicate with older members of our community. And of course, we know that radio is a really important one. And again, highlighting that when radio doesn't work, we're in real strife. And we saw that up in the Walwa Corryong area when the ABC tower was taken out during the fires, and radio silence absolutely prevailed. I think one thing that struck me about recovery post this bushfire incident is we were really good at getting lots and lots of messages out during the acute phase of the fires. And I think many people grieve for the loss of that when the fire's over. The amount of channels of information suddenly shrink, the numbers of bulletins go away, and we assume a bit of a silence around recovery. And I wonder, in fact, if we could do that much better, and if, in fact, we could phase people out of that very busy period of multiple announcements, but don't lose the announcements completely. The other key parts of this report, of course, were around ensuring older people are connected with the whole community. And that we focus on intergenerational planning and decision-making. And one of the things that I loved here, and another point that really struck me, was the role that older people can play in support and counselling for the emotional health of younger people. And so often we don't do that. And I think that was really a really important part of this report that struck me. And finally, for me, as someone who really values evidence and research, is the importance that we do have the right data collections and that we build on the evidence that we have and we connect the evidence we have. And again, something that struck me as an MP, getting around the community and trying to get an understanding of how local governments were working and And how we were identifying vulnerable people was what flaky evidence we actually have at a local government level around who are the vulnerable members of our community. And I think there's a lot of work that can be done in that space to improve those databases. So I won't bang on anymore. I'm just so proud to be your MP and be the one who is launching this report today. I thoroughly commend it, and I encourage members of the community right across our region to read this report and beyond. I know when I was in the business of writing pieces of work, I would be asked, "Who is this for?" And one of the answers was always, it was for policymakers. And now that I am a policymaker and a legislator, can I say to you that this is really very valuable? I think this is a piece of work. If you haven't already, you should be submitting it to the Bushfire Royal Commission and other reviews that are going on into our bushfires. And I think that there's more to be built on this in terms of strength-based approach to pandemic for older people. There's so much more that can be built from this, and I know you're all up for the challenge of that. So without any further ado, it is my great pleasure and honour to launch this report today and congratulate you for the fine work that's been done and for the impact I know it can have.
Thank you very much, Helen. Very comprehensive review of the report, but also some very detailed reflections there, which we really appreciate. And again, I'd like to thank all of those who have been instrumental in bringing the report together, and particularly Kathleen again for bringing in the collaborators from overseas to validate the various aspects of the report. We move now, now that the report's been formally launched, I'd like to introduce Loretta Carroll, who is a farmer from Mudgegonga who experienced the 2009 bushfire crisis, which was quite devastating through this region. Loretta has also experienced drought as a farmer in that region and has also been through the recent bushfire experience as well. So we thought it was important to have some personal reflection from someone who's been central to not only the experience but also central to influencing recovery and building of resilience within communities. You now.
And thank you, Helen, giving all that background, and you're doing a wonderful job. And Kathleen contacted me last week about the report, so I've had a good read of it, and I'm very impressed with the report and the examples it gives of communities being involved and those communities that get involved, and they sort of almost make their own future, don't they? They create some opportunities for themselves. And I guess that's what we did in going back to 2009. I guess the reason I became more involved in the fires was at the time I was president of the local land care group. And I feel, in looking back, that's what helped our community, I believe, to deal with the fires proactively, because we had a register of names of all local farmers in the area, and we were able to communicate directly with those people who were affected. And that gave us good stead, I guess, at the time. And what often happens in disasters, everyone's sort of frantically working in their own area, doing immediate recovery, like the Alpine Shire was doing immediate recovery work. They weren't aware of how much funding that there may be available. A lot of shires can't use funds, ratepayers' funds, to just help one community or two communities. They've got to be very careful and mindful of how they assist. And so things were taking, I think since then we've got much better, but at the time things appeared to our small community, to be taking too long to affect change or assistance. And so we sort of got a group of people together, contacted them and all our farmers, asked them to fill out a quick a small questionnaire to see what their issues were. And Christine Nixon, who was the head of the VBAF at the time, when she was visiting all the communities, rather than just listening to her, what she had available, we decided to provide a presentation to her of who and what we needed. And I think in the past with Landcare even, you find when funding is available, it's quite restrictive and quite difficult to actually apply it within the guidelines. So we went about and we spoke. Interesting that the report comments about the 25% of people in regional areas are often above the age of 65. I think in our community could well be more than 25%. But so those people, immediately sort of thing, we realised, well, there's a lot of skills in our community, and I guess Landcare had also already improved some of the skills in our local communities because we were good at managing grants and that kind of stuff. So we called on a lot of the skilled people and often retired people. They seem to have a little bit more time, even though they were going through an emergency and a disaster. We were able to tap in on those people and get them to help us put this report together and do a presentation. We've got a retired teacher to present to Christine Nixon. And so we were able to garner a lot of support locally, and because we were communicating to these people and the people affected, and we had a good idea of what damage had occurred, we were actually able to help because there was a lot of anger in the community. When Christine Nixon came, we were able to sort of control the community and sort of really give some direction to Christine Nixon. And from that, we wrote a report, or at that time, actually, we wrote a report for local people to print it up and presented that report to Christine, and then followed through a lot of the local shires and other organisations and ministers, state ministers and national ministers. And I think it really put us in good stead for them to come and ask us, what do we need? Because I think even with Landcare and the CMA, who were very much involved, they knew who to come to because they had those contacts and membership. And so having a register of community people is, in my book, very important. And if we can have the elderly people and members of some sort of organisation, you've got direct communication with them, and you can really help them to innovate and to progress things when there's emergencies happening. So that led to being involved in the Victorian Bushfire Appeal, a community approach, you might say, in Melbourne that people from in this area, or I was invited to attend, and we were able to set up committees in our area to work out what was needed in the local shires. And again, we had forums to get people, facilitated forums to actually get people to prioritise what their needs were. And from there, one of the needs that we found in our community was setting up a community foundation. That was 10 years ago now, so that foundation has been operating for 10 years. And we were also able to access $1 million from the fires. It was actually interest from the donations from those fires. And we were able to put that into the community foundation and look at long-term goals of our communities. So I see Ruth Kneebone attending today, and she's now the chair of Into Our Hands Community Foundation. And since that, we've been trying to innovate, and it takes a long time to get people to be familiar with what's out there, like a community foundation. What do community foundations do? They're very active in America. They've come across, they've done some really good things. But one of the pilot programs we've just been undertaking at the moment is a project which Helen actually launched, Our Prosperity Realised. And that's looking at a long-term goal of getting people in our communities to give locally say 1% or whatever of their bequest or other thing, any sort of funding, looking for funding to promote their own, like to set up an amount of money that we can use ourselves, communities can use and have control of that. So it's a granting type system where community groups, when they see a need, they might like to set up an organisation and really try to run their own goals or set up their own goals and innovate themselves without having too many controls. That's probably not explaining it very well. Should have Reese here, I think, explaining this. But communities in America have been very good at being able to sort of manage their own needs. And some of the things that came out of our community here, we got funded radios. Helen mentioned that Corryong was out of action for several weeks, no communication. Since our fires, that happened to us. So now every household in our community has got a radio. They can talk to each other. And we, in summer, we have skids every couple of weeks. We have a skid and just we all talk to each other. Yep. And if it's a really fire danger day, we communicate to each other. We're going to be out today, just in case that emergency happens. People know where everyone are, and it's just run by the community, and it's very successful. So I guess just probably following up, there's probably other information I could provide, but I think we were very mindful of the aged people in our community, and we were very mindful of getting them on board and giving us advice, actually, because a lot of them are very skilled. And I think if we can utilise their skills to innovate, and I think as a result, we with our innovation, you might say, apart from getting the $1 million for our communities long term, we also received $600,000 for immediate projects, which was setting up water tanks at our local shires. There were a lot of things, community, the water people, Murray Goulburn Water said, no, you can't have a water tank at your shire. And it was just a matter of communicating with these organisations. And, we asked them, well, okay, we need water at our shires for emergency. How can we do it? And they said, oh, well, actually, we can call it emergency, so you don't have to pay every year or every month or whatever. So there's just so many ways you can get around legislation or regulation, and it's a matter of really communicating, working with shires, working with other organisations, and we're all sort of pretty much after the one goal, you might say, and be, just sort of being very courteous, I guess, and just working out ways, asking, well, how can we do it better and what we do better, and just asking enough people and you'll come up with a pretty good result. But this report, some of the examples I gave, it's sort of pretty much the successful ones are doing the same thing, sort of innovating, listening and communicating the results or communicating how it can be done, and it's pretty much exactly the way we went about things. And it is so important to involve the elderly people who are so experienced in a lot of things. All
right, thank you very much, Loretta, for that input. I think something that came out for me in that is that whilst they're in disasters, bushfires, floods, whatever, there's a lot of negative impacts, but I think some of the examples that you articulated there shows the goodness in people and the resourcefulness of people to step up and to put a lot of good things in place that reports like this learn from and sort of bring all those experiences together. So thank you for your input, and also thank you for your continuing work in your community. So I'm not sure whether I mentioned earlier, but the Into Our Hands Foundation is, as Loretta said, is a long-standing organisation which has provided great support to a whole range of community initiatives over the years, and has been a terrific example of communities coming together to have some long-standing influence across various communities. The final piece is really to say that the report is now available on the Central Hume PCP website, and people wanting hard copies make some contact with Lisa, and she'll be able to organise that. But now's your opportunity to spread the word through your networks, give people information about where they can find the report, and go from there. So once again, thank you so much for making the time. Particular thanks again to Helen for your time being made available and the contribution that you make more broadly across the region and the electorate. And as I said before, please look out for some contact from us in terms of working with the Alliance to ensure that the work that we're doing is consolidated over an extended period of time. So I'll sign off now, and thank you all again, and stay safe and good luck.